let's go ahead. Thank you to everyone who has showed up today. We're excited for the dialogue we have ahead of us. And it's going to be a really dialogue around journey to politicization and perspectives from millennials, two members of Gen Z, and a revered representative for Gen X. We are very excited for this conversation today, and just wanted to welcome you all. So my name is Aiyah Josiah-Faeduwor. I'm a community resident, a current grad student, actively engaged in just multi-generational efforts to just get engaged civically. I'm excited for our panelists today. We have Kyle Bennet, Director of Policy at United Way. We have Dylan Conley, a current congressional candidate. And we have Jaychele and Isabella, Jaychele Nicole and Isabella James, representing Gen Z. I'll first go ahead and welcome Kyle Bennet to introduce himself.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here today as the OG in the crowd. Appreciate you. I just want to share with the folks out in the audience that I work currently for United Way of Rhode Island, but I also have a bit of experience in government relations and actual as an employee of government officials through the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island. I've been at this game for a long time, working on several campaigns, some more notable than others, but also, and more importantly, working with the community to ensure that we can actually get the vote out and get people engaged in the civic process. We know that elected officials are great when they work in favor of the people, but if the people hold them accountable, we know we always have the ability to influence who's elected, who's no longer there. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Kyle. And we'll go ahead and let Dylan Conley introduce himself.
Hey everyone, my name is Dylan Conley. I'm running for Congress in Rhode Island right now. I'm the chairman of the Province Board of Licenses. I'm the appointed attorney for a series of Rhode Island municipalities. I've had the pleasure of knowing Kyle through some work that I was able to do on the policy board at United Way, and was able to witness the incredible work of Gen Z We Want to Live. When in the march in Providence, I thought it was unbelievably impactful, and I'm just very thankful to be here.
Thank you, Dylan. And now, Jaychele and Isabella, you both introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jaychele.
I'm Isabella James.
And we're the co-founders of Gen Z Want to Live. We're both organizers here in Rhode Island. I've been an organizer for over 3 years now.
I've also done work within my schools for mental health advocacy within classical as well as Nathaniel Green, and am now heavily into introducing a culturally relevant inclusive school curriculum, as well as many other initiatives that Gen Z has. Yes.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you all for your perspectives, in particular, Gen Z. Just to echo Dylan said, you know, it's just amazing to see young people so engaged as you are, and it's inspiring. And just based off that, also, we understand that many folks have different understandings of what it means to be political, and everyone has had a different journey to identifying as political or engaging in something that would be considered political. I think it's an interesting decision one makes in their lives, and it happens at different times and for different reasons for different people. And the way that people engage can be in your own household, in your own local community, in your own school. It can be at the state level. It can be online. It could be so many different ways. And as we've come forward as a society, that whole idea of what it looks like to be political has changed. So with all the perspectives here, I'm just really curious and really want us to share your own journey to what you would say was when you became political. When was that first moment, and what does that mean to you now? What does your politicization do in your current life? So let's go ahead and start with you young folk who are here. Just really interested in your perspective on this and your journeys.
So again, my name is Isabella James. My journey to being political all started from, fortunately, I was raised in a household where I was taught Black history a lot, whether it was educated conversations in our household. We constantly had them, and I was always aware of what was going on in the world. They made sure of that, my mother. And as I got older and saw injustices like such as George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Elijah McClain, it, in a way that it hurt me, it also inspired me to fight for the rights, for the basic human rights of Black people, as well as many other initiatives like mental health advocacy. I have struggled lifelong with mental health issues, and I see how it affects me in my school life and many other factors in my life. So my journey and my influence to help others stems from that.
I first became an activist. I think when I started my first organization, I was 12 going on 13. I created a women empowerment nonprofit. It didn't really go anywhere, but it had lots of potential. And then once the Parkland school shooting happened, I saw lots of figures like Emma Gonzalez, David Hogg, really begin to use their voice in such a powerful way. And they were kind of close to my age, but not really. But it still really gave me something to strive towards and to be able to use my voice in a powerful way. So that was my 8th grade year. So then going into my freshman year, I joined a youth organization where I really got to learn all these skills and really meet politicians and gain those connections and meet people in the community. And that's kind of what got me here. And now I've left the organization. Isabella's a freelance organizer. And now we basically have Gen Z together now.
Wow. Thank you both for sharing those stories. When I was 12, 13, I was selling candy and making CDs for folk. Nowhere near the level of community impact as some of the things you're doing. So again, just echoing how inspiring it is that you all's journey and how early it started. Dylan, how about you tell us a bit about your journey?
Yeah, I think, but in high school, I ran for class president, and it wasn't really about kind of doing something in particular. It was about that I kind of didn't like the direction that the administration was moving in, and they were, choosing who could run for what. And so I wanted to push back against that and kind of had a lot of fun with it. And then throughout college, I studied a lot about politics, and then I ended up in law school. And for a long time, my game plan has been to try to get a stable living for my family, volunteer every spare minute I had to help out in the community as much as I could, but just kind of wait. I mean, I used to tell people that I would get into politics after I was done paying for my son's college, and he's not even a year old. But then all this happened, and I started to feel, this may be a bit hyperbolic, but I started to feel like I was one of those police officers that was looking on and was witness to what was happening to George Floyd. And I felt like I was doing everyone a disservice by staying on the sidelines. So that's why I decided to run for Congress. I just thought voting and volunteering in the neighborhood wasn't enough for me anymore. I just kind of had to do something.
Yeah, important. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that this is such a particular moment of politicization. It's very hard in this moment to see what's going on and to not be political in some way, to not see whether it's on social media or whether it's getting engaged with community or attending a protest. I think that's something that's really exciting about this moment. And I'm hoping to see more people kind of have the response that you had in response to what's happening right now. So glad you stepped up, glad you pulled some other people to get engaged with you, because that's exactly what we need.
All of you.
Kyle, what's going on?
Hey, everything's good as can be, right? I mean, this is what makes me excited, seeing more people get in the game. I think for my introduction, it was a little bit later in life. I was already 18. I was a freshman at North Carolina A&T State University, and had the opportunity to work on a congressional campaign, actually a U.S. Senate campaign. There was a guy from Brooklyn, New York, named Harvey Gantt, who was running against a long-time incumbent senator, Jesse Helms, who was one of the most racist, bigoted, just individuals that I think were deeply entrenched in the status quo because it favored him and everybody that he cared about. And I got so excited just to see someone who would pick up his life and move into the game and really think about how not just to disrupt Jesse Helms' candidacy, but as Dylan said, to put himself in harm's way and ultimately run the campaign. And he ran a great campaign. We worked on the ground game. It was an amazing race to the point that his candidacy would have been favorable, except the Board of Elections chose to allow 2 additional suburban districts to stay open for an extra 2 hours to ensure that he could not win the race. It was the most disgusting thing that I've seen. And they used the argument that polls were closing too early, that machines were broken, but we know the reality. They wanted to stuff the ballot boxes. And when that happened, I mean, I felt good about being part of the game, learning a lot of the strategy, the GoTV strategy. But when I saw the corruption that took place and the way that even the candidate who should have been the successful candidate couldn't petition through court because the court system was stacked, he had no recourse because the entire system was designed to continue to keep him out. I said, we've got to make a different choice. We got to get in the game, and we need more people from more walks of life to do it. And you know, revolution, evolution, and resistance always starts with young people. So I believe that was my purpose, and came back and really began to work as an organizer. You know, following folks that were doing bigger things nationally, but thinking, how do we get our people connected here? Not just to talk about it, but to be about it. You know, you ask the question, what are you going to do to make change? And it doesn't mean that you have to run, but if you have an inclination to run, we want you to run. We want to support you. Many people ask, how come you don't go to political fundraisers? I don't. I very seldom even contribute to political campaigns. If someone's running for the first time, I'm more likely to support you than if you're running for re-election. Because I think the machine is designed to keep incumbents there. And the hardest part is actually breaking through that. So some of those things I learned early on, they've stayed with me, and I focus on them because I know that that's the key to getting a critical mass of people that can actually change the laws, the processes and statutes, so we can actually have a fair and level playing field.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, for that, Kyle, I think your, you know, kind of testimony speaks so much to how politicization is an ongoing process, and you know, it grows and it changes as you go through time. So it's really important to hear that and have that said. I think another thing that's interesting about each of your perspectives was Jaychele and Isabella, you all talked a lot about like, you know, education and kind of learning and then getting involved. So there's this way that through education you kind of end up into a political space. Dylan, you talked a lot about, well, you know, reacting to a moment, reacting to a situation. Sometimes that's what gets you, you know, politicized. Kyle, you talked about, you know, joining a congressional campaign. Sometimes you get pulled into it. Sometimes you're minding your business and an opportunity comes and it's like, hey, you know, now you can't even think of it. It happens. And so I think that these different catalysts to politicization are very interesting, and you kind of sometimes you kind of got to listen and watch out for it, but sometimes it just happens to you. And I think that that's like a really interesting, important thing. I want to also just say that this is a dialogue. I know I'm moderating, but like I want you all to jump in and respond to each other as well. I'm going to throw questions out there from here on, and like everyone's just going to take it from where they want to take it and respond to each other. I know that this is a very important point of Gen Z. We want to live the role of education. And I think each of you kind of spoke about education. So you guys should just talk generally about how education has played a role in your political action. You know, how you think about it, how you educate yourself today. What does that look like? Because we know that that's a critical part. You can't just jump out there and just say, I want to be involved. You kind of have to do some level of learning. And I'm just interested in how you all have navigated that.
Yeah, so for me, education has always been a heavy part of what I want to have change. When I think about education and how I learned about, let's say, for example, in this conversation talking about Black history, I was taught at home when it should be taught in schools and in the school system. I was lucky enough to have an amazing mother, a Black strong woman in my life who taught me about Black education. So I was fortunate enough to have that, and the importance of that goes beyond measures because as a biracial young woman, I had to see those. So sorry, what's the word? White counterparts? Is that what you're trying to say? No.
Oh, I think they had some audio issue. Really hope they find out what that word was going to be. Any of you want to speak to it, and if they come in, we'll kind of be prepared. Oh, hello?
There we are. Are we back?
Yeah.
Did we find out the word?
Oh, back. Yes, role model.
It was role model.
Those Black role models in my life. Yep. So from that inspiration, I obviously went into my advocacy role, and the importance of education with Black history as well as a culturally inclusive curriculum. It plays in a role because people are inspired to do more and they see people like them doing such amazing things. And our concept is the thing of education and advocacy and how they work well together.
Yeah, the main reason that we've decided to focus most of our efforts on education is because, one, we're currently in the educational system. We're currently in high school. We're currently going through the system, and we see the injustices, and we're able to utilize our stories and our peers' stories in order to make change. And then secondly, because we want to watch out for the students who are coming after us, the generations after us. We're not just fighting for Gen Z. We're not just fighting for the older generations. We're fighting for the Alpha Gen, which makes no sense because Gen Z is going to be the ones to change things. But I guess they get to be called the Alpha Gen. So, but we're looking towards the future and seeing how we can make change, especially when it comes to education, because that's so important to us, especially right now, because that's basically like for most students, it's all that they know. They work and they go to school, and that's all that like their life consists of. So for those students who aren't able to have like the access to politicians and to candidates, we want to be that voice for them.
Thank you so much for that perspective. And you're absolutely right. We older generations, it's in your hands, but good, appreciative of work of folks like Kyle who've been doing this for so long, which has been so critical and important. I think for millennials right now, we see you, we see that you're ready, we see that you're engaged. We just want to make sure we don't get in your way. We want to make sure that some of the stuff that we can do right now, like technically you both can't vote. So we need to make sure we're voting so we can ensure that you have the leadership that's there so you can do the work that you need to do and we can support that. So, we need to move out the way because you're here and you're saying y'all have been taking too long and y'all not pushing enough. And we hear that and we really want to make sure that we support that and do our job. Anyone else could jump in as well on the education or response to anything that they've said.
I think Kyle said something earlier about you need a critical mass of people. And I got to admit that when I had made the decision to run, I was coming from like a very angry place. I was just so upset about, the oppression that these systems were putting on all of us. And then I went to the march that Gen Z, I would say pulled off. I don't know what words to use. It was absolutely incredible. And I visibly saw the critical mass of people necessary for huge change. And I have never felt anything like this in my life. I've always wanted to do like a whole bunch of things in politics over time, but I know how difficult it can be. And in this moment in time, because there's a critical mass of people kind of walking into the streets in the middle of a pandemic, demanding better, I see like an opportunity for serious change that I've never seen before. So, when you talk about politicalization and sort of the pathway to get there, it's both personal and social at the same time. I think you need a group of people willing to do something in order to do anything yourself.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think for me, I when I think of education, I think of the disparity. I was fortunate enough to attend an amazing middle school and high school in the Wheeler School, and I would come home or be on break, and I'd go to school with my cousins, and I saw all the challenges that happened in the public system, and just thinking about the difference between access and opportunity from from 2 schools within the same city. I mean, we're such a small city. We literally walk from one school to the next. I mean, down Hope Street, there's another school that I go to. Right on Westminster Street, there's another school that I go to. And I said, I can't believe that we can have these 2 scenarios where people from the same blood, the same tree, the same family are both going to school, but their experience is so different that there had to be more advocacy to be done to create a more equal system. I'm looking. Are you in, Jaychele? Are you in your mother's car? I'm just looking. You look like you're being chauffeured somewhere.
Yeah.
Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Kyle. Oh my gosh. Everybody knows everybody in Rhode Island. So.
Rhode Island. Yeah. But I think about it in terms of what the opportunities are. And I'll say that I have been impressed by We Want to Live, by Providence Student Union, by the young people who've been on the front lines, who they're not just complaining. They don't just post or tweet. They take it to the people. They will set up a podium, get a bullhorn, take it to the commissioner's office, take it to the superintendent, whoever can be instrumental in driving that change. That's what inspires me right now. So as Dylan said, we want to get out your way. We know where we're going as a people, as a community, and we want to be as supportive as possible, but definitely get out of the way because you're all making waves.
Yes. And so there's so many ways and places where we need change and we need voices and we need advocacy. And I know each of you has different levels of experience and choices and focus around specifically civic engagement. And so I just really want to know, also we're in a climate now and we've gotten to a place, particularly where you look at the American political system and, one could say it's never really worked, but right now it's never looked like it doesn't work, right? We used to have some counter arguments. In today's time, it's really, really hard to defend that this political system is working. And so, just interested in like you guys' feelings on the role of civic engagement. I'm particularly interested as folks who can't vote yet, but what does that look like to you right now? What does that mean? What is your kind of aspirations around civic engagement as well? And I know, Kyle, you've done work around voter registration and just ensuring the importance of that as a key piece of doing anything that's changed. And Dylan, obviously you're running for office, so I think it gets more civically engaged than that. So interested in you all's perspective on that and what your beliefs are on the role of civic engagement for folks.
I think we can start again. So for me, civic engagement really looks like, especially if you're unable to vote, it's not necessarily playing the political game, but you kind of have to learn in order to win, I guess. So kind of educating yourself on how it looks, what are the systems of government, how are the systems functioning, who's in power where, creating a power map when you're making initiatives, doing survey data, every little thing that goes into creating a policy proposal or a policy brief is so it's so minuscule, it's so in detail. It feels like it's heady work, but it's really what matters, because finding all that research, doing your own research, getting survey data, all of those things really matter. And you might think that that's not being civically engaged, but it's being more civically engaged than ever, because you're creating those policy proposals. So you can go up to somebody like the governor and be like, here, this is what we want you to do. You work for us. We need your commitment on this.
Alongside, even let's say on a smaller level than that, if that's not, well, it should be everyone's thing, but if it's not your area, you don't have the time for it, go into having conversations within your household, going to having this conversation with your friends. It might be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's worth it, and you can teach yourself alongside others.
It's necessary.
Yes.
I can tell I'm going to have a lot of reactions like this to the things that you all talk about, but I wrote my first policy proposal as a junior in college, as a public policy major. So to hear you as middle school students, okay, just, high school students talking about survey data and policy proposals is truly amazing and inspiring. If, I wasn't even aware of this stuff until 20 and, began the path towards that. But then to have that already, that understanding is just really, really, again, inspiring.
Yeah. And then I'll add a piece, just thinking about this from a touch perspective. Survey data is important, but making sure that people have access to that survey, access to the ballot, access to the candidate, That's important to me. So I've worked with seniors groups, with youth groups, and those who are on the lower income spectrum to make sure that we could provide rides when needed, that we could use technology if possible to connect folks. But more importantly, where technology is unavailable, which is still largely unavailable in a lot of our communities, at least 20% of our population doesn't have access to the internet on a device other than their cell phone. So trying to think about applying for a job, voting, anything where you might have to attach a document and, just be nimble. It's tough. It's tougher, I'll say. So thinking about how to create that access to then create the opportunity, I think that gets to the point of civic engagement from my perspective, but it also allows you to actually do some of that survey data at the grassroots level, face-to-face, anecdotal data, stories. And then when you find a person who's motivated that may not know that they can get involved, you can also help to educate them. You can let them know that they can work at the polls, they can run the polls, they can be the person who decides whether or not a ballot is cast, or when a ballot can't be cast appropriately, how to get the person, the individual, the right information so they can go to the Board of Elections or the municipal town hall and get the appropriate ballot. I mean, you can make sure that no one goes without a chance to cast their vote. And if you're younger, I always think about this opportunity. Being young is an asset many times because schools are closed on election day at times. So you can be the most instrumental. You can be the door knockers. You can make sure that the candidates who carry your issues forward, that their voice is amplified on social media. So I used to get excited. I always get excited on election day. In fact, I even take the day off of work, even if I'm not working somebody's campaign, just because I don't want to be beholden to anybody else on election day. Somebody might call and say, I need a ride. I'm not sure about this candidate. I need to review my ballot. Anything I can do to help, I want to be available. So from early morning to late at night, I'm always off on election day.
That's awesome. I love that election day energy, though. It's like a special moment, I get really excited for it too, and all I'll do is I'm just like holding signs out front, and I'm still getting excited about it. But Isabella said something that I want to jump off of because it's really important to me. You mentioned the importance of having tough conversations, and I think one of the strangest things about the human experience is you can't know what you don't know. And I think that's one of the biggest divides in America. I think in particular right now, whether you want to talk about urban versus rural America, or against different demographics or different ages, whatever it may be, I think we have this American presumption that we know the way things are, and the truth is actually the opposite, that we don't know what we don't know. And it's really important to have tough conversations. I always just try to remind myself that I'm a mean moron, and my job that day is to try to be less mean and less dumb. And it's that push that I think is really important, and something that we're missing in the American dialogue right now.
Agreed. That dialogue, I think is so necessary, and these conversations is so necessary. I just wanted to bring in a perspective that someone's throwing into the comments right now. We have Kristen Langworthy, who's speaking on the importance of civics education. She says civic education should include both culturally competent and inclusive history, as well as an empowerment-centered action-oriented practical training. And the RI Department of State is looking to recruit younger poll workers. I think this is maybe something, Gen Z, you all can specifically respond to. I know a big part of your platform is also the importance of education and how that needs to be reformed. If you guys have thoughts on that, if anyone has thoughts on that, but I just thought that I would just throw that comment to you guys.
Actually, so weirdly enough, going back to the voting thing, we just had a conversation early this morning with Secretary Nellie Gorbea about Vote 16 work, so lowering the voting age to 16 for local and state elections, and then also for looking at how to do voter registration the way that the youth want it, because we don't really want to go somewhere, like we don't want to be at a protest and be asked to register to vote. We're there to protest. What we want to do is our plan is to do a movie night where people can come and chill and watch a movie and eat popcorn with their friends, and socially distance, of course, because Corona, but be able to register to vote, because that's where our communities really come together, especially the younger people. We like free food and we like movies, and that's what's basically going to work for us. But when we're looking at the education piece and reforming our education, that's where that really starts, because we can only do so much to try and get people involved. But when you look at our schools and they're not teaching you anything about the current government, they're only teaching you about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. That connect is not there.
So I got to laugh at that. When I first started at United Way, we did a voter registration drive, and we did it at the Strand at a Nas concert. We did it in partnership with 106. We were like, hey, we want to do something where we're going to find young people. We want to get those who are not 18 yet registered before they turn 18, and those who are 18 and 19 to make sure that they're registered so they can vote. And it worked. The radio station was like, yo, this is hot. Let's do it. Let's take it to where the people are. And I would say that day we probably signed up more youth for the voter registration than we did at the mall. We went to the mall, we went to the beach, and that day we had at least 200 people that signed up. So it was a big success for us, and we got to chill with Nas, and yeah, it was cool.
Yeah. I also want something that has been brought up in different ways is the role that identity plays in your civic engagement, in your education. I think it was you, Isabella, who mentioned like being biracial and how that affected your politics to some extent. Kyle, to the point around access, these things differ for different identity groups, whether it's race, class, neighborhood. These aspects, Dylan, putting you out there as a father, I'm sure that like to an extent your politics has been influenced by aspects of your identity and how you identify. So if you all can speak, to any aspect of it, whether it's personally this aspect of my identity politicized me in this way, or I think about politics, really focus on this particular identity group. I think that would be a really interesting thing to hear from each of you.
So I'll leap in real quick and just say that one of the things that when you become a father, your identity changes. And so I think something that was a really big driver for me very recently is not necessarily the self that I've identified with my entire life, but sort of this new role that I have. And that change in my identity was a trigger for me to want to approach politics differently.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that. As a father, it certainly changes your perspective on many things. I'll also add to that having an interracial marriage. My wife is Dominican, and we look at sort of how folks from the Dominican community respond, the Puerto Ricans, the Blacks, right, and my Native folks, right. And it's funny because in every community there's a different level of response, but then even outside of those communities, which are part of our ethnic groups, I look at how others respond. And it's interesting when we talk about issues. Sometimes they impact our individual communities differently. And I think, we fortunately are able to dialogue and come to consensus on most every issue. I think because I have a smart wife, that's why. But realistically, there are some things that are population-based that could put us at odds potentially, because the way the system is set up, we are forced to invest in the Latino community or the Black community. Very seldom do we see things that support broadly people of color. There's specialized funds, there are grant opportunities for one group or the other, and then you have to fight for the crumbs off the table rather than saying, hey, the pie is good, let's all slice it so we can get a piece of it. And those are the times I think we find ourselves getting stronger, pulling ourselves together, realizing that as a community, we're stronger when we advocate collectively versus pitting one ethnic or racial group against another and forcing the General Assembly or Congress to cater to one of us over the other.
Mm-hmm.
So what I always say is I'm a Black, queer, young woman. So I have no choice but to be an activist. I'm being disenfranchised in every single way.
Wow.
For me, I was raised in a home with a white woman, a biracial mother, and a Black grandfather. So I had a lot of different cultures. It was Italian, we were Jamaican, we got all this different stuff. I'm not going to give you my entire ethnic background, but I always connect with my Black side more, and it pushed me because when I think of Black, I see power and I see outspoken, but in the best way possible, like, just vigorous and intelligent. So that was my representation, and it just pushes me to be more of an activist, as well as I know that I have my privilege being a light-skinned young woman. So I push for those who are of darker complexions, as well as myself too. And yeah, that has been.
Oh, you went on mute.
Kyle, I can appreciate that because you know, my wife's African American and she's from the South. So there's two different gaps there, and thankfully she's smart too, and she always corrects me when I don't understand something.
Right.
That's critical. That's critical. Okay, so I mean, we are in the times that we're in. You know, there's a lot happening right now, and so I do think that one of the things that I'm just specifically curious about is how this moment is affecting your perception, your feelings about uh, um, uh, the future of politics, the current state of politics. And you know, it has a personal aspect of it. I'm just, you know, as students currently, I'm also in grad school right now, but to be in high school and to have this happening, I'm sure it's having a significant impact on maybe partially also giving you some maybe availability you didn't have before to get engaged, but you know, it's also just affecting your learning right now. So how do you all feel like this moment, not just only because of COVID, but also the civil unrest? You all have spoke to police brutality, you know, getting to a place or not getting to a place, but people being home and it being more viral than it's been in a long time, people seeing it more in a way that cannot be ignored. How is this moment in particular kind of impacting you all's like energy, you all feeling about, you know, hopefulness or hopelessness in politics?
Who are you asking, Jaychele and Isabella?
That's like a general, you know, people
Right.
respond to how this moment.
Let me respond to that real quick. I'll just say it's like the sun coming up for me. It gives me energy every day when I see the resistance taking effect. Folks are saying, "Oh, it's gone on too long." I'm like, it hasn't gone enough. Every single day, there's a new policy shift. There's a new program in place. There's more accountability on the part of local police departments. Every time I see someone being held accountable, I think the protests are working. Keep it up. Right. I don't think we've done enough yet as a collective. We have digital communications, we have in-person protests, we have door-to-door, neighbor-to-neighbor, you know, coworker to coworker. There's a lot to do, and I think what we're faced with is a finite amount of time, and then also this candidacy, this election. So we've got to use this leverage right now while we have it. And those people who are listening right now, and I know you're listening, I'm gonna say I have one issue. There's so many that I can talk about freely, but there's one that I talk about every time somebody gives me a microphone or a platform. So thank you, Aiyah. And it's affordable housing. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and we're asking people to quarantine, to isolate, to stay in home, shelter in place. And there are thousands of people in Rhode Island that don't have a place to stay. If you're an elected official and you're in a position to invest in affordable housing and you're not, you better watch out. I'll just say that. I know there's some things happening at the General Assembly. There's some things happening at the City of Providence. The governor's on something. I know that there's some movement, but if it's not substantive and it's not systemic and long term, you better watch out, because I feel like people have now realized that it's not just a Providence issue. It's not just a Pawtucket or Central Falls issue. Every city and town, every neighborhood is short on housing, and people are strapped. Even if you have a home, many people are still struggling to keep the doors open or keep the lights on. They can't figure out which one to do. So, elected officials, hopefully you're listening. I know you are. This is my top issue, and you're going to hear more about it over the next several weeks and months, if not years.
Appreciate that, truly, Kyle. And if you all have any other threats you want to get out, kidding. We're talking. It's not threat. It's accountability. It's accountability, and you know, definitely utilize this platform to speak to folks that you do. We all need to be holding accountable. But yes, other feelings on what this moment is doing.
So for us, right now we're kind of in a place where we feel like the energy and the momentum is beginning to die down, which is not fair at all. Like, we worked so hard recently, and we're about to go even harder. Like, we have a 7-day, 7-city protest, which we actually just announced today, so I can actually talk about it. But we'll be in 7 cities from the 19th to the 25th, and you can find it on our Instagram and our Facebook, actually. But we're here to prove that it's not stopping, and one, that the youth are leading the charge, and two, that this is going to be a continuous movement until we get justice.
I believe, well, to speak on my behalf as well, I feel as if the deaths, the injustices, everything, the murders, it most people, or generationally, it would be like, oh, we're used to it, like this is normal, like it is what it is. And for us, it's like it infuriates us. We want to keep going, and we want the power that we unfortunately had to get from a murder. We have to use that to keep fighting for those lives who are at risk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just listening to a podcast the other day. I believe it was Vox's The Impact, and I think it ties these 2 points together a little bit on in terms of affordable housing. There's a lot of great studies that say that the absolute best thing you can do to deal with homelessness is to just put people in homes, just give them homes. And that's just an economic reality. It's actually the least expensive approach to solving the homelessness issue. And there's actually a trickle-down impact on police departments. The amount of resources that police departments, which are fundamentally a paramilitary organization, they're responding to homelessness issues. And it's kind of a weird mismatch that you have a paramilitary organization responding to homelessness issues. And you know, if we start approaching these systems in a holistic manner and we try to understand how things like affordable housing can impact policing, which can impact, you know, the life and safety of the people that are supposed to be served and protected, I think that sort of stuff is really important. I mean, really important. And I think the pandemic is kind of shoving all of that in our face all at once. I mean, millions of people unemployed, the mental health stress that comes with that, how vulnerable different populations are to contagious diseases. There's just a lot in our face all in the same moment. But like Kyle said, it kind of gives you energy. It's an interesting thing. It's the sun rising.
So Dylan, to your point, and I'll extrapolate a little bit further. When I think about the demographics of the state of Rhode Island, Black people are 5% of the population, yet represent 29%, 28, 29% of the homeless population. So I'm like, why are we overrepresented here? But I know it goes back to systemic issues around housing, around home ownership. When you don't own a home, it's harder for you to control the policy that is being exerted on your community. So if you're a renter and there are forces that are driving up rent, you have no control. If you own that property, you can choose whether or not to increase the rent on your tenants, or if you reside in that unit, you can decide whether or not you can afford to stay or whether you cut other expenses out. But if you're a renter, it's very hard for you to control or influence those things outside of the electoral process and advocacy route. So I think about, to your point, using a paramilitary group to address a human service issue, and ultimately the demographics of those people who are being served in some cases, but abused in others. And I think these are additional impacts that are certainly a burden on the Black community, as we're overrepresented in this particular population. Yeah. I know Pawtucket had an issue this week with their police officers taking photos of folks who are living in a tent city in Pawtucket. But not just photos of people, they were photographing their tattoos. You know, we know from Providence that some of those tactics were used to enter people into a gang database and used to associate them with criminal activity. And I'm not saying that's what's happening in Pawtucket, because I don't have that information yet, but I know that there's a history in Rhode Island of that sort of tactic being deployed. And I think, again, about these populations, I'm wondering who is being impacted the most. And from my perspective, you know, to your question, a couple questions ago, Aiyah, about who I am, I'm a Black man. It's clear as day, but I am a Black man. And I always think about issues from a Black man's perspective, whether they impact me or not. Because I know when we look for outcomes that are positive or favorable, we have white folks at the top and Black folks at the bottom. And looking at the outcomes between Black men and Black women are slightly lower or further down that totem than Black women. So we get, in many cases, the raw end of the stick, looking at outcomes, whether it relates to health disparity, income, affordable housing, acquisition, home ownership. So I always think of these issues from that perspective. And I'll just share, lastly, that I think when it comes to paramilitary organizations, I don't know what the best solution is for policing, but I know if the organization itself is instilling terror and fear on the population it's designed to serve, that's not the best tactic for us to have. When we have folks that jump out of cars and harass people and intimidate them because they're not sure what they're doing, I think that's not the best tactic to deploy. So we've got to come to a point where we can have an honest conversation about the type of policing that we need in our communities and the disparity that exists from one community to the next and the type of policing that's deployed. And until we do that, we're never going to be able to address the system. We can defund police, we can protest police, but until we can talk about the type of security that we're looking for everyone, and the acceptable treatment that we're gonna take from officers to the community, and what the consequences are when they don't meet those standards that are the ideals within each of their departments, I think we're never gonna get to the bottom of this issue, and we're gonna continue to see protests and unrest.
Yeah.
So sorry to switch back to the housing issue. Kyle and I, you and I have talked a lot about housing, and it's something we both care about quite a bit. But one of the biggest problems with the systemic wealth gap in America is the rate of African-American home ownership versus white home ownership. And there are actually small policies that people, I don't think, very often consider as a driver in that, is the way FHA loans get subsidized by the government. There's a strong preference for single family properties. That's a suburban preference. And then that has a demographic impact, right? And just things like if it was much easier for condos to be managed by maybe a government organization, and then people can purchase properties, and then that is their sort of their savings bank. I mean, that's always been the American path to the middle class since, the end of World War II. And those home ownership rates are starkly different amongst demographic lines. And anytime I think you see a stark difference based on demographic lines, that's an outcome of a system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
failed policies, yes.
Yeah, that leads me to an important next question, and maybe might end up being our last, depending on what's going on here. But so we acknowledge that there are these policies that have been set in place, and the policies, as you read them, aren't inherently racist, sexist. They aren't homophobic. They, are, if you live in this area, if you're under this certain level of income, this is, what's available, and if you commit this crime, this is what happens. But we all know that these are layered on top of a system that has marginalized folks and has instituted structures to keep the status quo as is, right? So as we have these things that are happening, these moments that happen, these things that have been there's wild numbers. I don't have the stats on it, but something about Black wealth. I think they, did just Black wealth being, at the same place today in totality as it was, in the Reconstruction era. These wild kind of just where things are, and that having been sustained, how do we expect our new results in a system that is still essentially functions the same way? What kind of systemic changes do you all think are necessary in order for us to actually see different types of results?
Oh, thought Dylan would jump right in, but guess what? I think it's simple. I think it's simple, Aiyah. There are probably 3 things we could do right now that can change outcomes for people, particularly Black people, for generations to come. The first is we can address this notion of minimum wage. If we look at the majority of employees in the state of Rhode Island, they exist at or below the poverty line. That's unbelievable that a state could have so many people below the federal poverty line, which is not really what it costs you to live and be in a healthy situation. So we can address wage discrepancy, but we can also address the discrepancy between wages and profits. I think a lot of the companies that employ folks in Rhode Island and around the country continue to experience record profit sharing. And even those that are closing are offering golden parachutes to the executive teams on the way out of office after they drove a company out of business. How do you get a bonus when you forced your company out of business? You ran it into the ground. But I think we don't have enough checks and balances as it comes to business regulation because their lobby is strong and the people's lobby is not as strong. So I think we can do some things there. And then the last thing I'll say, it comes right back to home ownership. We have to get to a point where we tilt the scale, where we, I talked a little bit about programs earlier, but we have to define programs that will support people that have been disenfranchised the longest to create additional opportunities for wealth. And, you know, the city of Providence, some years ago when I worked there, we had a program where you could buy foreclosed, abandoned, or vacant house for $1. Right? If you live next to the house, you could buy a house for $1 because you're going to own it, you're going to rent it, but you're going to be a property, you're going to be a manager on the same footprint. So chances are you're going to look out for the neighborhoods. But we didn't just say you could buy the property for $1. We coupled it with a revolving fund that supported the development of that formerly inhabited property. So the person could own it, they could move into it or rent it out, but they had the money to bring it back up to code, to back up to standard, back up to a safe and healthy place to live. I think if we begin to look at populations that have been underserved historically in Providence, in Rhode Island, in the country, and create programs that address them directly to immediately impact their wealth, immediately. It will immediately impact their health. It will immediately impact every other aspect of their life. And I think those three things are something that we can do that certainly will have an impact long term. And I say Black, but I'm including other communities of color, other oppressed populations, certainly, Native American population. I don't think we ever get a chance to talk enough about that disenfranchisement, because talk about wealth stripping. I mean, it wasn't just wealth, it was land, it was energy, it was activity. Right. No, I think we got to do more.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so the way I think about this is right now, the way we have arranged money in our system is it's trickle down, right? And so all of our entire tax structure, the way we structure our economy is so that the very highest end of America makes money the easiest. Yeah. And then flows down to everyone else through employment. Now, there's two problems with that create inefficiency. The first is the people at the very high end, they don't need to spend. So they can put things in savings or in tax havens. So there's your first portion of inefficiency, right? Money's getting kind of gummed up at the top because it's being saved as opposed to being spent in the economy. The second issue is that employment isn't a great way to distribute discretionary income because employment can be hard to come. I mean, there's 40 million people unemployed right now. So that is freezing and destroying the economy because there's no access to cash to spend cash within the economy, right? So if you reverse it and you do things like a $15 minimum wage, the other thing about a minimum wage, anyone who tries to tell you that a minimum wage is like a subsidy for Americans is failing to recognize that the lack of a minimum wage is functionally a subsidy for corporations, because we end up covering all of the additional health and welfare benefits necessary for these Americans to actually just live, right? So lower minimum wages is covered by taxpayers. And so higher minimum wages kind of takes corporations and doesn't allow them to abuse our benefit systems. But things like having healthcare for all, Medicare for all, things like for the duration of COVID, not a one-time stimulus where you don't know when it's going to come or what it's going to be, but regular expected stimulus checks on a monthly basis, because what that does is people will spend that money. If they get one check and they don't know if another one's coming, they end up saving that money. And again, every time there's savings, money isn't flowing through the system. And if money isn't flowing through the system, then it's not functioning well. And I think if you keep on tweaking all of these little areas, earned income tax credit, child tax credit, what you start to have is an increase in discretionary income for the average working class family, and they spend that money locally. And then that creates a positive feedback loop. And I think that works for every community, and not just, one group or another, and no one's picking winners or losers. It just flows up from the bottom organically for everyone.
I really appreciate those points and those perspectives. I think they get at the heart of, like, we talk about, political change and the up top structural things that we may have different perspectives on what system makes the most sense, but you two get at the heart of just like, well, you give everyone the ability to be able to not be focused on paying rent and having a place to live and being fed, and then we can work on these other things. And so it's really important to get at that foundational piece. So I know we got to get off soon. It might be, maybe we have room for one more question. We know Mayor Lorza's term is ending soon. Kyle, is there anything you want to announce? Anything that you want to let us know that you?
I live on the cusp of a great neighborhood. I say that to my friends and relatives in Washington Park, and also to my newest neighbors in Edgewood. But no. So that's not something I would like to announce. I used to say never. Now I've learned, I think being a little bit older, you learn not to say never. But I do think that there are some solid candidates that are well positioned to run for that seat. I think executive leadership is something that for most mayors, they learn on the job. Very few have been executives of corporations or other organizations in their previous experience. And that's a tough job to learn on the fly. But I think having a strong team coming at it, as Jaychele mentioned, with data in your hand on the community needs directly from the people, not from a 10th party analysis, but really coming directly from the people because you beat the pavement up, you talk to them. I think that's important. And when I hear more candidates who are ready, I'd like to support those campaigns. I'd like to help them beat that pavement up and get out into the communities that I know and love, those that I grew up in Wiggins Village or on the South Side. But I also lived all over the city. I think almost every neighborhood except Silver Lake. But Providence is poised for the revolution, but also the second Renaissance. We've seen that before in most of our, at least our 3 lifetimes on the call now. And I think we're ready again. Some of those businesses that have closed their doors this summer, they may not open back up, but there's something else that will come into those spaces that continue to bring life into the heart of the neighborhood, also into the down city and throughout the state of Rhode Island. So I'm looking for those exciting candidates, and I want to get behind them and support, the best way I can.
Well, thank you so much for being that elder statesman and for, being that role model, being that mentor for us. And that's such an important and critical role. I hope those listening who don't know you do their best to get to know you in outreach, just to get that wisdom and that knowledge, as you've played that role in so many of people my age and I'm sure younger and older's lives. So before we leave, I'm gonna let you all get the chance to just let people know if there's something that you would really like them to look into, something you'd like them to check out, something you'd like them to know about, any of the work you're doing or the things that you're really pushing for right now. We don't have the Gen Z We Want to Live folks right here, Jaychele and Isabella, but I know that they mentioned their social media. If you look them up, you'll find them, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, and they have this a program for a protest they have happening in Rhode Island in 7 cities coming up. So just take a look at that schedule. I'm sure they would be saying that to see what they're up to next. Dylan?
Yeah. Same here. The website's conleyforcongress.com. We're on Twitter, although I'm still learning Twitter. I'm not great at Twitter yet. We're on Instagram and Facebook. I'm pretty good at Facebook. I'm okay at Instagram. So look us up. It's been a lot of fun kind of getting all this up and running, and I hope that we can use these avenues not so that we're speaking to you, but so that we can have a dialogue. So find us, find the campaign, and introduce us to what your thoughts are, what your concerns are, and bring our attention to what matters.
Awesome. Kyle, anything?
Yeah, I'll share 3 things. The first is call your state representative today and tell them the importance of affordable housing. The House, and particularly the Finance Committee, they're wrestling with some issues. The Senate Finance Committee, they're wrestling with some issues. Call your senator, call your rep, tell them affordable housing is important to you and we need to invest heavily in it. Secondly, complete the census. We're in the midst of census, and that determines how just over a third of our state budget is financed from the federal government. If you're not counted, you're not funded. So complete the census. Some people think it's not important. It's about $4 billion worth of importance. So if you don't complete it, we may not only lose a congressional seat to Montana, of all places, but we may lose, more importantly, dollars that support programs that we really care about and need, like food stamps, senior citizen support, housing, and childcare. And then the last thing is, don't forget to vote. This is probably going to be one of the toughest years because we've already had a presidential primary. We have a statewide primary September, and then the general election on November 3rd, in November, sorry. But make sure you make it out every single time because our local elections are just as important as the statewide and federal election, if not even more so. If you don't decide in the primary who you want to support, you may not have a choice in the general election. So cast your vote and then make 5 more people go out and vote too.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Thank you so much, Dylan. Thank you to Jaychele and Isabella. Thank you to everyone who tuned in this evening. We hope to keep this going, so we'll be back next Thursday with a different topic. But really, really appreciate y'all being a part of this inaugural exchange, and looking forward to the next.
Thanks, Aiyah. Thanks, Dylan.
Thanks, Kyle. Jaychele, Isabella, thank you.
All right, y'all.
They already set it up. They had to bounce.
Yeah.
Take it easy.